Welcome to my presentation. So my presentation is on about the antibiotic resistance crisis and if that can be prevented. So I will be talking through my findings as well as my EPQ journey. I know there's some non-specialist audience in here, so I'll be explaining things as we go through. So first talking about why did I do an EPQ. So I'll talk a bit more about how did my EPQ journey started. So where people start this by reading academic journals and articles, I think I probably had a strange way of starting. Mine started from a meme account. I'd like to share that meme with you. So this is, I was scrolling across a science meme page and I came across it. So it says, penicillin is called a wonder drug because any time a doctor wonders what you've got, that's what you get. Now, in a joke, there's something very serious about the misuse of antibiotics. So this got me really thinking about antibiotics and how they've been misused in the past and how that's led to resistance forming, as antibiotic resistance. So I went ahead and I did just want to read. I wanted to do more than just read. So I knew that there was an opportunity to do an EPQ. So I signed up for it and just talking about my title progression. So from that, so the first thing was the misuse of antibiotics and resistance. So I started to research more into that, but then I kind of realized that I wasn't really finding anything new. I knew everything about this already. So I did more research and I came across how successful antibiotics have been in the past. Now, then I realized again that I kind of know the answer to this already. Antibiotics have been really, really useful there isn't anything else to it. So then I started to look a bit more into the future of antibiotics and I came across something which was called the antibiotic resistance crisis. And then I tried to look into if that can be solved and if that can have devastating consequences. So then I looked into can alternative therapies to antibiotics prevent the antibiotic resistance crisis from happening. And I went ahead with this topic. I talked with my supervisor and I chose this topic. But when I started to do my research and widened my topic to be can the antibiotic resistance crisis be prevented, and this is what I went ahead with. So talking about my methodology, so how did I carry out my projects? So to warn the scientists out here, I did not invent a vaccine, I did not invent any antibiotics. All I did was secondary research. And this is simply because I felt like I wasn't qualified enough. The only qualifications I had my GCSE and my Duke of Edinburgh bronze, and I don't think that puts me at the advantage of some of the world leaders and some of the world experts who have done the research and they are far better than me. So that's why I went ahead with the secondary research. So talking about, so from the beginning of my EPQ journey, I had this research diary. So this allowed me to have my bullet points, the key information in my table, as well as a little analysis, and I also had the reference, so if I wanted to read more about it later on, I could easily refer back to it. And I also had an evaluation table. So from reading different articles, I realized that not every article was appropriate to use, some were biased. So by evaluating it, by looking at the author, the publisher, the relevance of this, I could analyze if this was biased and if it's fine to use in the resource or not. And then when I got set on my EPQ title, I set my aims and objectives. So what was I going to do? So this allowed me to break my topic down and it allowed me to monitor my progress as I went through. So I split it up into 4 topics. First one being effects of resistant bacteria, how can antibiotic resistance be slowed down, Is enough being done against antibiotic resistance now? And what else can be done to prevent antibiotic resistance? So enough of that, I'll talk about my findings now, which most of you are here for. So what is antibiotic resistance? So bacteria simply can harm our cells. They can destroy our cells, and in some cases that can make us really ill, hospitalize us, and may even kill us. And in response to that, we can give antibiotics. And this can kill, or it can slow down bacteria. So there's different ways. So for example, the antibiotics may target the cell wall synthesis, so may prevent cell wall from forming. So this is what gives the bacteria strength. So that will mean that bacteria will be an easy target. And other, for example, DNA synthesis, so preventing bacteria from replicating, and protein synthesis, so preventing bacteria from making its organelles and its enzymes which it needs to function. So by doing that, we can kill or slow down bacteria. But then bacteria is quite clever. In response to that, it can form resistance, which can prevent antibiotics from functioning. And just comparing that, so they can have, for example, efflux pumps, which can pump out the antibiotics out of the bacteria. And for example, inactivating enzymes can inactivate the antibiotic itself, so then the antibiotic won't be able to function. So this is really bad, because it can lead to, at the current rates that antibiotic resistance is forming, it may lead to something called the dark age of medicine. So what is the dark age of medicine? So currently, 4 million operations are carried out in the UK each year. And from an operation, from the cuts, a bacteria can get in. And this has been treated easily in the past because we can just give antibiotics and that would be able to treat. But now, if a resistant bacteria wants to come inside our body, we won't be able to give antibiotics. So that can be really bad, as that may mean the person may be at risk from dying from this, essentially. And cancer treatments, so some of you might be aware that, for example, chemotherapy, it doesn't only affect our cancer cells, it also affects our healthy cells. So for example, the white blood cells, which we need for our immunity. So if we don't have enough white blood cells, what this can mean is simple, minor infections can be life-threatening. So that's why we need antibiotics. In case someone going through chemotherapy, if they were to come across a bacterial infection, they can be given antibiotics and be treated. But because of antibiotic resistance, we may not be able to carry out chemotherapy, and so cancer treatments would be going down and there would be increasing death rates. And finally, prolonged hospital stays. If someone was to come to your hospital now with a bacterial infection, we can just give them antibiotics and they'll be fine. But now, with the resistant bacteria, we might not be able to do that, and that can mean they will be staying in the hospital for longer. But not only that, I haven't really talked about the economical side. It will be costing us more money because there will be additional care we have to provide them, and for example, in the ICU, and this can cause so it can cost £5,000 per person more than what it would normally cost. So costing a lot to the healthcare systems. So what can we do? So slowing down antibiotic resistance. So slowing down antibiotic resistance is basically slowing down the consumption of antibiotics, because the more antibiotics we consume, there's a greater risk of antibiotic resistance forming. I'd just like to share a few statistics with you. So 50% of patients with a cough or a cold live with antibiotics. And from the overall prescription of antibiotics, 20%, or 1 in 5, is unnecessary. Now, you might ask, why are they unnecessary? So just looking at the structure, so more cough and cold can be caused by a virus. So comparing the structure of a bacteria to a virus. So for example, a virus does not have a cell wall. So an antibiotic won't be able to function against that. So for example, I talked about where antibiotics may target the cell wall synthesis. Now, they can't do that in a virus. So antibiotics are essentially useless against the virus. and that's what's causing unnecessary prescription, also increasing the antibiotic resistance. So why is the antibiotic resistance, unnecessary antibiotic prescription so high? If antibiotics does not work against viruses, then why do we prescribe them? Now, the simple answer is that the symptoms for the bacterial viral infection are quite similar. So just comparing, for example, bacteria, the symptoms are cough, fever, difficulty breathing, fatigue. Now, what are the symptoms for viral infection? The most common symptoms are the same. There are some different symptoms, but it can be hard to identify for a doctor. And what a doctor might end up doing is prescribe antibiotics as a safety net to keep the patient safe as well as themselves safe. So from my research, what I found was we could use something called rapid diagnostic tests. So we've seen with the COVID test, it works in a similar fashion. If a patient wants to come to a GP surgery, for example, we can just give them a test, and within 10 minutes we would be able to find if they have a bacterial infection or a viral infection, and then this can help the doctor or the GP identify if they should give the antibiotics or not, and this will also satisfy the patient. And reducing antibiotic consumption in animals. So I would like to ask any of you, so guess what percent of the antibiotics are given to animals?
40%?
40%? Yeah.
35%.
35?
20%.
20%, yeah. So this is what I would have guessed. But it is as high as 70%. 70% of antibiotic usage is in animals globally. But you might ask, what's the point? Well, antibiotic resistance can also form in animals. And that this may mean that they pass on the resistance to us. So it's essentially giving us resistance because of animals. And you may ask, why is such a high percent given to animals? It's mainly for growth promotion. So when antibiotics are given to animals, it can compete with the harmful bacteria inside the gut of the animal, and this can increase the productivity of the animal and could be more beneficial for the owners of the farm. But then there's two solutions to reducing antibiotics in animals. So the first one I looked at, reducing the antibiotic usage in animals which are used in humans. So this can help reduce the consumption of antibiotics in animals. But this is probably not a sustainable solution, because this can mean that the farm industry, the animal industry, will be greatly affected. Now, something else I looked at is giving alternative to antibiotics as growth promoters. So, for example, probiotics. So these are just beneficial bacteria which can compete against the bacteria in the gut of the animal, and this can increase the productivity of the animal. So this is beneficial because we're not using antibiotics, but we're doing the same job. Okay, so phage therapies. So from my research looking at alternative therapies, I came across phage therapies. And so a phage looks something like this. So they're basically viruses which can target bacteria, they can infect bacteria. And something in particular I looked at is lytic phages. So they work in this way. So the phage would infect the bacteria, and it would hijack the bacteria's machinery and start to replicate. And finally, it would just come out of the cell, bursting the cell membrane, the cell wall of the bacteria, which can cause the bacteria to burst and die. Now, this is really helpful because we're not using antibiotics, we're using something else instead of that. And just have a guess onto how, I would like to ask anyone, just have a guess how many phages there are in the world. Anyone?
10 trillion?
10 trillion? Decent guess?
100 trillion?
100 trillion?
50 trillion?
50 trillion. Well, that is how many phages there are in the world. That is 10 million. I only learned this yesterday. So because of this huge number, because of this huge abundance, it means that for every bacteria, there is a phage present. So we can so for a specific infection, we can have a specific phage present. And it just means that resistance to phages can be easily managed by the fact if resistance was to form to a phage, we can just use another phage because of the huge diversity. So they can be very useful. So finally, an important aspect of my findings was we need a global action. So resistance can form anywhere. It can form in the UK, it can form in India. Now, countries like us, UK, are taking action against antibiotic resistance because we have the ability to, we are wealthy enough. But is that enough? So for example, just looking at total sales in food producing animals in 2016, so UK, it was around here at one point, but now it's reduced its to sales in food producing animals. But even though UK has reduced, for example, looking at Cyprus, it's 9 times more. But antibiotic resistance can form anywhere, and it's so easy to spread over borders because of the huge interdependence we have on each other. And that's why we need a global action, not a national one. The World Health Organization should be taking a global action monitoring antibiotic resistance instead of just nations taking an action. Because if the UK was to take every action possible, they would still be resistant forming in another country, which can pass on to the UK. Okay, so this was from my findings, but looking at my strengths now, so reflecting on my EPQ, I think I use a wide range of resources, and I critically analyze. So I showed you the evaluation table. So this just helped me make sure that I wasn't using any biased resource and that all my findings were accurate. So my report was accurate at the end. Now skills, I think I've gained a lot of skills from this. So organisation skills. So from the very start, I had the research diary to note down the key information so I could return to them later on. I recorded my references so that I could again track back to what I had earlier found. Now time management, I knew I had to manage an EPQ along with my 3 A-levels as well as other commitments. So I had to manage my time well, and I've improved my time management skill greatly in this. Finally, report writing. I hadn't written a report before, especially a scientific one, so now I'm more used to the structure of a scientific report. And I think it's going to be useful for me in the future. So I've gained knowledge about, so I'm an aspiring medic, and antibiotics is something that's greatly related to medicine. So I've gained knowledge in that, and also I've learned research skills. I think I'd love to be involved in research later on. So I've gained research skills which can be really helpful for me later on. So weaknesses, I did not conduct any primary research. Even though I said that could have been a benefit, I think in some way that was a disadvantage because I did not have to do any mind-blowing experiments. I could have just done a simple interview and would have been able to find information about key information about antibiotic resistance. And I decided my topic from the beginning. So as I showed you my topic progression, everything was about antibiotics. Now, instead of just doing that, when I was doing my research, for example, I stumbled across palliative care, which I was also interested in. Now, if I had not decided my topic from the beginning, if I had done more research, I might have been able to merge 2 topics of my interest together. So I should have done more wider research. And I realized that a lot of the research recently has been on COVID. Antibiotic resistance has been kind of left over. Most of the resources I was using was, for example, 5 years, 6 years back. So that could they have been out of date? Could that have affected my EPQ? Perhaps. So what would I have done differently finally? So I think I would have spent more time exploring different topics of interest. Again, if I was able to do that, I might have been able to merge two topics of my interest together. I should have planned my research. What I realized was that when I was researching, I was all over the place. I would have become interested in something and I would have just gone on, and that sometimes led me to a tangent. So if I had planned research, that could have been better. And I should have started my report earlier. I think when I started it, there was other commitments, for example, mock revision, other things. So I wasn't really able to properly have the sufficient time to be able to do it. So I think my report may have been slightly rushed, and if I had given it more time, then I would have had a better report. So these are the things that I would have done differently. And finally, I would just like to end with a quote. So it is important that we act. If not, we run the risk of antibiotic resistance, killing us before the climate does. Now, the politicians and the right stakeholders have taken action against climate change, war and other issues, and rightly so. But antibiotic resistance has been left over. Now we've seen with the COVID crisis that it can leave the wealthiest of nations and the best healthcare system badly affected. So if the antibiotic resistance crisis was to come, I can say that it would be far worse and the consequences would be far more detrimental. So if an action isn't taken now, it might become far too late. Thank you. Any questions?
Is there any other alternative methods to phage therapy which you looked at, but which weren't as good perhaps?
Yes, so I also looked into immunotherapeutics. So that they can basically boost our immune system to fight off bacterial infection. So that's all because we're not really using antibiotics, so that's also an alternative. So that's what I looked at as well.
Also, were there any downsides to phage therapy which could so maybe perhaps they were damaging to humans or anything?
Yeah. So I looked at that as well. So so phage therapy, because they're basically viruses, sometimes in patients which are immunosuppressed and which have a weakened immune system, their immune system might think, oh, that this is because it's a virus, they might start attacking it, and so it can lead to an infection it's basically an infection of a virus then, so that could be harmful to the patient. So I looked at that, but phage therapy is only in its infancy stages right now. It's not really developed, so I think over a few years we could possibly come up with new downsides.
So why do you think there's been an attempt to get global action on climate, but not on antibiotic resistance?
I think it's because antibiotic resistance has been very slowly developing. So climate change, we can see the effects right now. It's present to us. So politicians are starting to realise that there is no other way than to have a global action. But antibiotic resistance, because the effects haven't been as much as the climate change, and that's why politicians and other stakeholders have been have not really focused on it yet. That's probably why I think.
And you not mentioned the role that developing alternative drugs could play. Did you look at that? It does that have a role to play, or are we going to be playing catch up forever?
Yes. So I think, just talking about antibiotics, so even if all the appropriate actions were taken, antibiotic resistance could form. If everything was done, antibiotic resistance can form, because it's just an event that can occur at any time. That's why I think antibiotic alternatives to antibiotics are very important, because there must be something else, because antibiotic resistance would eventually end up forming. And alternative therapies to antibiotics may mean that we may be able to, for example, with phage therapy, we might be able to provide more personalised care to a patient, more specific care, and that could be beneficial.
Thank you.
Thank you.